Welcome to the Lake of America Daily Podcast. I'm sorry, the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, August 28th, 2026. I am John America, the editor of America Magazine, and with me as ever is executive editor Abe America. Hi, Abe.
Hi, America.
And of course, senior editor Seth America. Hi, Seth.
Hi, America.
Okay, so basically, Donald Trump decided to rename Lake Ontario Lake America, and this follows, of course, renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And if there were any reason to take this as anything other than a sign of extraordinary personal indiscipline and the idea that the leader of the free world and the most powerful person in the world by many reckonings is spending much of his day with his associates and the people closest to him, thinking up giggly ways to stick his finger in the noses and eyes of those who have offended him. I don't really think that's a good use of his time, and it is about as embarrassing a series of behaviors as I can imagine in public life, with the exception of somebody like the former mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford, who of course went around and then was doing crack and falling off buildings, and I don't know what was going on there 10 years ago.
He was cuddly though, in a way that Trump is not cuddly. But
Well,
I will say, by the way,
yeah.
that the Lake Ontario thing and all the naming is, it has convinced me that we should recognize Donald J. Trump as the father of Canadian nationalism.
This is actually a completely original and excellent point you are making. Because, let's go through it. Without Trump last year interfering for psychotic reasons that are inexplicable in the Canadian election, Pierre Poilievre, the conservative who would have been an ally of the United States and friendly to the United States, would have won the election. Instead, he's talking about annexing Canada. Mark Carney becomes the Prime Minister of Canada, is now kind of worldwide leader of a kind of the worldwide resistance movement to Trump, and Trump summoned this on himself. Everybody says that Poilievre was on a glide path to winning that election until Trump stuck his nose in it.
So instead, now there should be monuments to him in Canada, and his name should be on stuff, because I think we can argue that Canada was not truly free until Donald Trump liberated it. But I've spoken to Canadian. Weeks ago I spoke to a Canadian about this, and I asked him straight out. Actually, it was a Canadian who had finally become an American citizen, and so I asked him about the dueling patriotisms and what it means, and all that. And he was very clear that there was a strangeness now in becoming American after being born and raised and lived a Canadian into his adult life, that there wasn't when he was younger and he was hoping to become an American. That there is a kind of weird sea change where Canadians really did just want to become, they wouldn't admit it, but they came to American colleges and universities, and that was their, especially when they came to elite American universities, that was the ticket. That was that was, you've made it, and they were going to stay. And so there was this, I can't wait until I don't have to say I'm Canadian anymore. In these, groups of elite Americans, I can just be sort of one of them. All of them. I'm going to college with all these people who are going to be clerks to the future Supreme Court justices and all this stuff, and I can just blend in. And now it's I don't know. You
But
know, he's
you're saying
American.
solely because of Trump or because of other reasons?
Well, Trump has a lot to do with the recent ones. In
I
speaking to
would think
people
so.
who have,
Yeah.
yeah, recently there is an acknowledgement that Trump has kind of awakened some, and they laugh about it. There's no, you don't meet any
Oh,
Canadians with painted
a lot
faces,
of them
but
aren't laughing about it. People are laughing about it. A lot of Canadians are not laughing about it. That's the point here. Carney is an unsuccessful and would have been an unpopular politician. He has been given this I don't know what you would call it, jujitsu life by Trump's hostility and management of this relationship, which is why I think the point about Canadian nationalism is so interesting. Canada, of all these countries in the world, was one of the ones whose elites were moving much closer to a kind of not one world government, but this idea of like worldwide global consensus on a host of issues involving the environment and the economy and this and that and the other thing. And, the kind of place where its officials and its government were, love nothing more than to go to Davos and sign accords with this one and that and be like move beyond the sin of nationalist frenzy and patriotic fervor. All of that was hidebound old silliness. And in having an enemy, and I feel like a lot of Canadians feel like Trump personally, not the United States, but Trump personally, is their enemy. They are banding together with a new sense of national consciousness that is kind of interesting. And I don't know what the practical effect will be. We
well, but
here,
it's
yeah,
genuinely changed Canadian politics.
yeah. I mean,
It's
we here,
unusual to have that because it's unusual for us. It's unusual, I think, for anybody to have a foreign leader change your politics that much. But that's part of what it means, honestly, to be the American president, to have that, you can change people's politics that much, and he has.
I mean, I think we believe that Canada, and this is Trump's great error here, among many others, uh, do sort of feel like Canada is a nominal protectorate of the United States. It's sitting there. Sure, it's a country, it's got its own political system. It's got its own currency. It has this cutesy little thing where one part of it speaks a lot of French, but mostly it's just America. Mostly in the West, it's like just an extension of Washington State and Wyoming. And further Calgary is like Texas, and further east is just where where comedians come from. Comedians are sort of born and they're raised and they go through whatever it is they go through, and then they kind of have a great moment in a production of Godspell in 1972, and every single one of them becomes a massive global comedy star. And so Canada is just America, only, they don't have any responsibilities, and they're very polite, and they walk around and they have they say about in a funny way. And that's Canada. Like it's like Puerto Rico, only whiter, or or Guam or something like that. And it's not. It's its own nation. It's its own country, and it has looked for a purpose in some ways, you might say, and it may be getting its purpose. I think it was for the first time in 160 years of its existence. So.
I will say though, John, I mean, this is how I don't know if when it comes to these things, I feel like Trump has trained me to respond to his antics over the years. So where I would have immediately sort of put my head in my hands and you know sobbed, I now see there's always an element of knowing self parody when he does these things too. It's not purely. I mean, it is lashing out, of course. It's a kind of tantrum, but there's always like a wink where he's being the guy that you can't believe he's being, and he knows it.
I just think he's surrounded by idiots. I mean, frankly, just like let's talk talkless, as we say here. The people that he hangs around with all day stimulate him into idiotic antics that we know are not working for him. And how do we know they're not working for him? Because his numbers are in the shitter. That's how we know it's not working for him. The economy is not in particularly bad shape. People really haven't suffered because of the war in Iran. The war in Iran itself may have taken a turn for the better or more serious in the last month. He then goes around, tears down the East Wing, paints statues gold, says he's going to tear down the Kennedy Center unless his name is going to be on it. People are pouring this stuff in his ear. It is as though his toadies, his palace court, and all of that are a bunch of callers into his. They're like callers to the Howard Stern show. And you, Abe, as a Howard Sternologist, one of the funniest things that would happen on the Howard Stern show when callers would call in is Stern felt absolutely free to take these calls and then insult the caller and hang up on him if he didn't like them, or make a joke with them, but then insult them and then get off of them. We don't know what his relations are with these people, and I'm sure that his Secretary of State sits there with his head in his hands every now and then, simply because who's the one who gets the call about Lake Ontario? Does Trump get the call? No, Rubio gets the call. I mean, Rubio gets the call, and what is he supposed to say? What possible thing can he possibly say? And then I feel sad. I was meant to mention this earlier in the week because, Trump is a complicated person, and Abe wrote this really wonderful newsletter the other day, a completely transformative perspective on the jokey stuff about his assistant, Natalie Harp. Abe, Abe, I think, totally convinced me is a mark of something that Trump did and has done that is entirely admirable, for which he has not sought credit, and has been defamed, as has Natalie Harp. You want to sort of give us a taste of that?
Yeah. So, this all started weeks ago when John Ossoff in some speech made a dig about how all Trump wants to do is fly around with his aide Natalie in a apparently unsecure Air Force One, because of the event that happened when the president was returning from Turkey and there was a threat. So he covertly switched planes and brought Natalie. I don't mean to call her Natalie. I don't know her. Just came out. Brought Natalie Harp on the more secure, perhaps more secure, secret diversionary plane with him. And so, of course, this got everyone looking into who is Natalie Harp, why is she always there? She's called the human printer, and why is she so loyal and faithful? And what's going on between them? She's an attractive young woman, and the media, the Daily Beast, and others did a lot of digging into her life, letters that she wrote to Donald Trump, and the story. When I looked into, and it was all to insinuate that there's something unseemly going on between them. Either that, or she's a crazy sycophant, certifiably crazy, and that's why he has her around. Or there's something more illicit happening there. So, but if you look into it, this woman got a rare form of bone cancer sometime around 2015. got chemotherapy, unsuccessful. Around that time, 2018, I think, I don't remember, Trump signs the Right to Try Act, or whatever it was, which allows dire patients who are in the last throes of their illness to try experimental treatments that have not been approved by the FDA. She tries one of these, credits it. It works, credits it with saving her life, credits Trump with saving her life.
Remember, she was 20 at this moment. She was 26 years old. She got this cancer in her early 20s, and it was a death sentence. So
Then,
yeah,
after this, her father commits suicide. She's been in touch with Donald Trump at this point because she had made a big speech, I think at the RNC convention, praising his right to try, praising the Right to Try Act, which saved her life. So Trump spoke to her after her father committed suicide, and we know this from the letters that have been dug up that she's written to him, and she said there was an allusion. I'm paraphrasing. I'll never forget what you told me after my father died. Thank you for always being my protector, and this and that. So it seems very clear to me that he said, "I'll look out for you now that your father has died," and he very clearly has done so. She's by his side at the White House, and she was on the secure plane. So to me, first of all, I agree with right to try. I think that is a very wise, humane thing that he did. And he has been good on his word and seemingly compassionate with her. I've never seen him in such a warm, wise, and dependable light as this story shows. And as I said in the newsletter, people say she's crazy for being so loyal to him. I would be, signing my letters to him with, hearts and flowers. I mean, if he had done all for me that he's done for her. So, yeah, I find it disgusting that everyone went after her. I mean, they got her brother, who's some kind of jerk. They got her brother on CNN talking about her, about how, she bought into the family myth about the America or something, like all this horrible stuff. So, yeah. And meanwhile, at the same time, feminists are out supporting Lindsay Clancy, who killed her 3 small children. But Natalie Harp's committed this terrible crime of being a loyal employee of Donald Trump.
Can we move on to Lindsay Clancy for a minute? I wasn't, this is going to be a very snaky conversation because we didn't really set anything up here as to what we were going to talk about. I've been thinking about this story about this, mother of 3 who sent her husband out of the house and then killed her kids and then jumped off the second story parapet or something of their house and is now paralyzed. And the decision made by a certain number of people in and around social media and sort of in the professional controversy business to take her side in some weird fashion. Like I believe, based on what I can see, that if there ever were an argument that there was a person with a recognizable condition of postpartum psychosis, you would need to look no further than this story, which makes no sense. She had nothing to gain from the murder of her 3 children, followed by her jumping off a balcony and then paralyzing herself. And nonetheless, there, just like with Luigi Mangione, there has been this body of opinion that has arisen in the wake of this 20-year saga of you know what? Let's talk truth. Let's talk turkey about motherhood. It's horrible. Motherhood, particularly motherhood of small children, is horrible. You know, you're eaten alive. You can't get a second to yourself. Generally speaking, your husbands or the men in your life don't do enough to help you. You're drowning. Yourself is being submerged in this societal demand that you put everybody else first next to you and all of that. And now we have a sort of object lesson in something unspeakable that people then pick up and say, okay, you know what? I mean, this is okay. There, but for the grace of God, go I. And I believe that the there, but for the grace of God, go I example of trying to think about people in emotional extremis who do terrible things or, you know, do self-destructive things or whatever is a real thing. Like that is something that gives us a sort of certain common humanity. But this is something else. And then this is where I was going with this. Everything is amplified and nothing is stratified because of the way the algorithms on social media work. So there could be 970 people in the United States out of 330 million who think Lindsay Clancy is innocent and did something heroic and go on and hold their baby on TikTok and say, go Lindsay, while they're holding their own baby in their arms or something like that. In other words, the number of people who have this view could be 0.0001% of the population. But they are thrust in front of us as though they represent 20 million people. How could we tell the difference based on the information that floods toward us? And then, of course, the reaction, which is the horrified, disgusted, gut reaction that something evil is going on, and the idea that you could feel pity for her or accept that something really horrendous had happened inside her brain.
Well, that to me, John, what you brought up first was the really interesting part to me, because yeah, if you want to show mercy to someone because they are horrifically ill, in a multiple life destroying way, I get that. Then you muck it all up if your case is that what she did is somewhere in the range of the normal range of the stresses of motherhood. It's not the same thing. You're talking now. You're one thing. You're talking about mental illness and mercy toward the sick. The other is a sort of socio-political statement of solidarity that has nothing to do with it. And that's the part that bothers me.
Well,
Seth,
also, I think, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that one of the unfortunate lessons that we've learned from politics and culture over the last several years is that it may be 0.01% of the population, but this stuff seeps into the online world, which since COVID has, for so many people, replaced the real world, that it really does grow exponentially. These things really, you're not going to have more than 0.01% of the population showing up at the courthouse or maybe even tweeting in support of her. But these things grow and fester below the surface online in a way that is really unhealthy. They feed these ideas into people's social networks, and the social networks have grown in importance over the past 6 years so much that they do, in some cases, become the real world. Not in the sense that it's really the way the world works, but in the sense that you can more often now get an idea of what people think from the internet than you used to be able to. Because even though there's still all ton of noise and all this other stuff, social networks became, during COVID, the only functioning social networks. Online digital networks became the only functioning social networks, really. And I think it did change things in a specific way. And you look at it in these other directions, like you look at some of the sort of playful anti-Semitism that you see among younger people, who think it's cool and provocative to play with Nazi insignia and stuff like that. But then you hear stories of kids in school, and kids will come home and say, "Yeah, all my friends make Nazi jokes now." Now, that doesn't mean America is America written with 3 Ks the way the left used to. It's not Nazi America now, but you can very easily see the way that any transgressive idea that makes people feel empowered or part of something. I was going to say important, but it doesn't even have just part of something. You can see the way these ideas filter through. And then they get regurgitated. And of course, I think it's a different conversation about whether all this stuff, stays ironic, stays as jokes, or when you wear the mask long enough, it just becomes your face. But the Lindsay Clancy part of this is just that people are out there, and it does get into the bloodstream of culture, in a way it wouldn't have before. And part of that, I think, is probably the lack of guardrails, the lack of people maybe in your life saying, if your social networks are online, there's nobody you're hanging out with next to you who's like, come on, what are you doing? It's like if you're gathering with friends in person, there's always going to be one or two people who are like, all right, let's settle down here, But in the internet, you feed yourself into these self-reinforcing bubbles. You join social networks that you already know are going to spit this stuff right back at you, and there isn't the same kind of feedback mechanism. There's just the positive feedback loop, and I think that it actually does really popularize or make ideas much more popular than they otherwise would have been.
And when you speak, I just want to say, if you speak to someone who's been locked into one of those sort of that steady stream of the same idea that belongs to some sort of online theory group of any sort, as you say, Seth, and then you speak to them in the real world, it's very obvious. It's shocking the way that they've never rubbed up against real world opinion or dissent on their issue.
So two things, one of which is the thing about Lindsay Clancy is that Lindsay Clancy doesn't happen. I mean, this is something that happens once every 30 years. Because I can remember the last time that something like this happened, and it was Susan Smith
there was
in North Carolina.
The one who drowned her kids. Is that the last time?
Drove her kids. Yeah, she drove her kids into the. She had a motivation. She had a motivation. She wanted to kill her kids so she could run off with her boyfriend, and the idea was she drowned them. Then she said they were kids. I can't remember what the story was. Then it turned out that she had drowned them. This became a major political story in the United States because Newt Gingrich, then the Speaker of the House, said that it was the permissive culture that the Democrats had created that made Susan Smith possible. And people, liberals and people on the left and others, I think rightly, were profoundly disgusted by this effort to politicize this horrible tabloid monstrous crime that is almost by definition not an example of anything, because when things are examples of things, there are plenty of examples of things. Mothers killing their children is not a thing. It's the opposite of a thing. Mothers committing multiple murders of their children is not a thing. There's a little bit more of a thing with fathers doing murder-suicide things, usually in the midst of custody disputes or something like that. But even that is not a thing. I mean, like if there are 2 or 3 of those a year, that's not a thing. The idea that you would identify with Lindsay Clancy when what she did is something that never happens, that you would in fact never do yourself, is what's terrifying, because that's I think Abe's point. What you're getting at here is, why were we so freaked out about Luigi Mangioni's assassination of Brian Johnson? It wasn't just that somebody went up and shot a guy in the back. It wasn't just that it was a political act. It wasn't anything like that. It was, is this creating a new kind of human interaction, murderous human interaction, that will be encouraged by positive reinforcement among people who say, look, no one should ever shoot anybody in the back, but you can understand our healthcare system is terrible. And of course, somebody who wants to shoot somebody in the back isn't like, yeah, the healthcare system is terrible. It's like, yeah, I'm going to go shoot somebody in the back. Because if you shoot somebody in the back these days, somebody might call you a hero. That's why I'm actually relieved that he took that plea deal, and that that's really gonna be the last that we see of him, even though he wasn't convicted of the murder of Brian Johnson. He admitted to having done it. He was convicted of stalking him, 2 different counts, and will spend his life in jail, because a trial, a continuation of this, simply continues the possibility of his becoming a folk hero, becoming a Robin Hood, becoming a whatever. And the world that permits people to believe that they have something in common with a woman who murdered her 3 children, who almost certainly murdered her 3 children in the throes of a schizophrenic, psychopathic episode, is a world in which there will be more people like Lindsay Clancy. Not a world in which there will be fewer. The sympathy will not stay someone's hand with the idea that people will really understand how hard this is for you, and so you should, you can go get help. It'll be more like, I had to do it, just like Lindsay had to do it. I had to do it. I needed to do it. And I didn't seek help or whatever. This is also stimulated for me by the release yesterday of the transcript of her husband's call to 911, because there's a little body of opinion that was like, it's all his fault. He left her alone. He wouldn't leave. And of course, all that is nonsense, because they'd spent months going from doctor to doctor trying to find some cocktail of medications that would ease her agony. And she tricked him. I mean, she tricked him. She got him to leave the house so she could fulfill her psychotic scheme. And then he's now like being put through the ringer by people who say he's one of those men who doesn't care enough about his own and was doing his own thing. And if you read this transcript, I'm not gonna read it aloud to you, and I could barely bear to read it myself. The first thing he saw was her body in the driveway, and ran over to her, and he's like, Lindsay, what happened? What happened? What happened? Stay with me. Can you tell me? Can you speak? Stay with me. The ambulance is coming. Oh my God. What happened? How did this happen? And then there's this like slight break. And then apparently he starts screaming. Oh my God, she killed the kids. And then one of his kids, he's like, buddy, wake up. Buddy, wake up. She killed my kids. She killed the kids. Where's the sympathy for him? I mean, this is the most sympathetic person on the planet Earth. The man has just been through an experience where his children were murdered by the wife that he was desperately trying to help. So, we were talking yesterday about the meta settlement. Go ahead. Oh.
John, I think it's such an important point you bring up, especially when you're linking it to Luigi Mangione as well, because I think we also see it, we maybe first saw it in the post-October 7th solidarity with the monsters of Hamas. I mean, when the protesters and the Intifada declared themselves not maybe, they mix in pro-Palestine, but explicitly as fans, supporters, believers in Hamas, Hezbollah, justifying, defending what they did on October 7th and what they continue to do. That was another one of these moments where you have seemingly normal people aspiring for some connection with monsters, with evil, with something beyond the range of normal human behavior. I continue to think that the campus and activist embrace of that 3 years ago unlocked something larger in the country, or set something in motion that will be very hard to contain. And I think we see it in all these examples that you're talking about.
I don't know when this was, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. The show Desperate Housewives premiered on ABC, and the guy who created it was a sensation, huge hit, right? The guy who created it, his name was Mark Cherry, and when somebody said to Mark Cherry, "How did you get this idea for this? Like, you're a man, you're a gay man. Why are you making a show about suburban this cul-de-sac?" In which all these marriages are falling apart or whatever. It's so funny. Where'd you get the idea? And he said, well, it actually came from Susan Smith. He said that he had been talking to his own mother, on the phone with his mother, or he was with his mother, and he said to his mother, "Can you believe this story about Susan Smith killing her kids?" And he said his mother took a long drag on her cigarette and said, "I've been there." And this got into his head, and sort of like was the seedling. In other words, like, who knows what's going on? It's the classic soap opera, Peyton Place. Who knows what's going on behind the door of your neighbor, in what a seemingly placid, paradisical suburb of America. All kinds of horrible things can be going on behind that door, and you don't know what they are. Let's take a look behind the door. But then think about that story again, and Mark Cherry himself personally. His mother said to him, "Yeah, I kind of had fantasies of murdering you." Now, he made a joke out of it. He made a fortune out of it. He made a sort of cultural touchstone out of it. But that's horrifying. Now, maybe she was joking. Maybe it was a joke. He didn't seem to think it was a joke. And how many Mark Cherrys are there now?
Well, and also the Lindsay Clancy thing is that makes it not a joke, right? I mean, there's parenthood
Right.
can be stressful, and there's a billion people walking around the earth who are like, and
Yeah.
now it's like that's not a joke.
Yeah.
That's not, you better
Yeah.
watch what you say. Like, we joke about how parents, mess up their kids and whatever as a sort of rite of passage, almost like every parent's is like, what are our kids going to talk about in therapy joke? It's like all
Yeah.
of this becomes not a joke anymore the second somebody fulfills what was, obviously a joke. I mean, I think a lot about school shootings in this regard. There are a couple school shooting stories that stood out to me. One of them is uh, about a year after Columbine, this no-name band submitted a record with a single to their record label. The band was called Wheatus, and they became a one-hit wonder from this song, which is like universally beloved of everybody of a certain age. It's like impossible not to sing along with. It's whatever. The song is called Teenage Dirtbag. And it's a, and the kid is like somebody who listens to heavy metal and is a loser and nobody knows who he is and whatever. And he talks about the girl that he's in love with in high school and her boyfriend. He's describing her boyfriend as a tough guy. He drives an IROC, whatever. And at one line, he says, he brings a gun to school. So this is not from the perspective of somebody who's a loser and is contemplating violence. This is very clearly from the perspective of somebody who's like, oh, these cool, sports car driving, football players with the hot girlfriends that people like me could never get. They're so cool. They bring a gun to school, whatever. The label was kind of freaked out by this because even though it wasn't anything suggesting a school shooting, it was a year after Columbine. And I think people understood, well, there's the copycat phenomenon, but there's also this, like, have we actually dealt with what we used to think were jokes? And now people are going to take and fulfill, and they're not jokes anymore. Like, how do we deal with jokes about guns in school? We don't know how to talk about it. To this day, you listen to the song plays on the radio. The song is, kind of like a classic from that alt rock era. The song still today, the words gun to school are bleeped out. It's not a curse word. Yeah. It's not a drug. Sometimes they blurt out, sometimes non-curse words that are blurped out are like, names of drugs and stuff like that or whatever. The words you hear, he brings a, and then, a record scratch. And this was so interesting to me because nobody in the song is suggested as bringing a gun to school to do something violent. It was this moment where there was a transition in culture where you literally went from, oh, the cool, tough kids bring a gun to school to the losers bring a gun to school to do something terrible with it. And it happened at that moment. Like literally that, it takes a while to produce an album. They were probably writing the song before Columbine. I mean, I don't know. We could probably find out. But the point is that it all happened at this moment when everything in the culture shifted because of one act that was at the time rare.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the opening of that Overton window culturally, because let's go back 20 years before Columbine. So the new wave band, the Boomtown Rats, fronted by Bob Geldof. So this is British new wave, wanting to be shocking. They weren't punk. They weren't they weren't biting the heads of live chickens on stage or anything like that. But they were transgressive. They wanted to be transgressive. And they produced a song called I Don't Like Mondays. I Don't Like Mondays was a phrase used by the person who may have been the first school shooter in the United States, Brenda Spencer, in San Diego in 1979, who went into school, shot people. And when the cops said to her, why, she was, 17, said to her, why did you do this? Her answer was, I don't like Mondays. And so this very peppy, catchy new wave song that was clearly playing around with transgression by making this idea like the hook for a peppy chorus, comes out. Geldof's life changes. There's at some point it comes to him, not that he is responsible for anything, but that he had done something that seemed to honor the act of evil that Brenda Spencer had committed. And Bob Geldof kind of turns into a saint. He creates Live Aid. He spends his entire life doing humanitarian works. Now, he says he regrets having written it. He also says that he did it because he was trying to understand. They did it because they were trying to understand this inexplicable moment. But it's pop culture. It's on the radio. It's on records. Kids are listening to it. How do we know that there isn't a through line from I Don't Like Mondays by the Boomtown Rats to Dylan Klebold and Columbine, which was 20 years later? We don't. But a world in which no one ever sang a song called I Don't Like Mondays is a world in which maybe Columbine doesn't happen. I mean, we can't, there's no way of knowing, but maybe that's a world in which when the Menendez brothers, kill their parents, a whole bunch of people don't rise up and say, well, their parents must have deserved it. Because they were mean. And then, in fact, even recently, Ryan Murphy produces a Netflix show sympathetic to the Menendez boys on the grounds that their father was physically abusive to them, which we A, don't know to be true, and B, we do know, or what we do know is that they were mad at him because he took away their car keys or something like that. And then they killed him and they killed both of their parents and then tooled around Southern California spending all the money that they had inherited until the cops finally arrested them and threw them in jail. An America in which, go ahead. Sorry.
This reminds me of you can see it on YouTube. I think I've recommended it to you guys at some point. There's an incredible short BBC film that features Don DeLillo. It's from the 80s or from like 1990 or something. I don't know. And it's about his thoughts on, it was, I guess, after he wrote Libra, which is about Lee Harvey Oswald. And it's his thought on assassination and assassins and media. And the most fascinating thing about it is how DeLillo links movies about assassins to then a real life assassination, that then there's a movie about that, then a real world assassin sees that movie and goes out and does something, and so on. And he draws a line from, there's a Frank Sinatra movie where he was hiding out playing an assassin, and I forget
Suddenly.
the name.
It's called Suddenly.
Suddenly, straight through to the attempt on Ronald Reagan after Taxi Driver. Just movie, real life, movie, real life, movie, real life. Not just coincidentally, but there's an impact. There's a real through line through them all. So that when you talk about this sort of chain, it's very real.
Well, I mean, the chain is there. Oh, go ahead, Seth. Sorry.
No, I was just say I saw the movie The Drama with Zendaya and Robert Pattinson, and I now understand why everybody says Zendaya is a great actress. By the way, she's very talented because she really is very.
Yes.
I didn't watch she's in other Euphoria and stuff that I just I don't watch, and so I didn't really. But she really is wonderful. But anyway, the movie is, and this is not a spoiler because the whole point, before the movie was released, you would watch the previews and the previews would show that these two couples were having dinner and they played a game where you say each person says the worst thing they've ever done. And they go around, and in the trailers, whatever Zendaya's character says is the thing that sets off the drama. But you very quickly learn in the movie, the admission is that she planned a school shooting. She's getting married to Robert Pattinson. The other couple is already married, and they're like the best man and best, and maid of honor couple. And they're planning their wedding, and the dinner happens literally at a tasting for the caterer. So they're, the wedding is approaching, whatever. And I thought this was such a brilliant idea for a movie, like such a great wrench to throw into it, because it's not, So I Married an Axe Murderer was a comedy, one of the greats, but a comedy. This idea that like, oh, did I accidentally marry a serial killer, is hard to make serious. But the school shooting is the thing that makes it automatically not a joke. You can't write "So I Married a School Shooter" with Mike Myers. You can't. You can only write "So I Married an Axe Murderer." But the school shooting thing, the movie, it's very tense. It's pretty well done overall. I mean, it's anxiety inducing if you're not into that sort of thing, because it's very uncomfortable. It blows everything up. I mean, it changes everybody's relationship. The fiance, Robert Pattinson's character, has this whole, can I marry this person? Do I know this person? And then, of course, he does all these human things. Like he looks back and, the time that she was angrier than she should have seemed in a certain situation or whatever. She years ago had bought him this coffee mug that says, coffee or I'll shoot. And he throws it in the garbage because he can't even look. This was I thought so brilliant, because it was like there's years ago in the original Office, the show The Office, the British version, there is this one of the guys in the office is trying to explain how to be calm and brush off whatever anybody says, whatever accusation is made, and the woman pretends to make a rape accusation. And the guy who's teaching everybody how to brush it off, like, he freezes, because that's the one thing you can't actually just brush off, right? That's what the school shooting is. This one thing, you can only make a movie like The Drama, where you sit there with your chest tight for an hour and a half or however long it is, and everybody in the movie spins out because of this thing. And of course, she didn't end up doing the school shooting, whatever. But to me, this really jumped out as such a cultural thing, because this is that one thing, kind of like the Wheatus song, where he's not even bringing the gun to school for that reason. You just can't be funny.
But aside from not being funny about it, it's like what you are establishing here, as DeLillo did in that BBC documentary, as you are, as all of, is that social contagion is a real thing. School shootings are contagious. Assassinations are contagious. We lived through a 20-year period, not only in the United States, but across the democratic civilized world, of near constant assassinations, until the Reagan and John Paul II assassinations within 3 weeks of each other seemed finally, 18 years after Kennedy was shot and killed, John F. Kennedy, seemed finally to be it was almost as though the universe spat it out, like the universe is spinning off its axis. This must stop now, and it stopped. I brought up the Boomtown Rats, and whether or not there's some weird echo of whatever was going on there that could have led Dylan Klebold, whatever, to think that it was cool. He was also operating on the basis of dressing himself up like Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie The Basketball Diaries. That was how he and his friend decided they were good. That's whom they were modeling themselves on. Abe, you mentioned Suddenly, right? Which is a movie in which Frank Sinatra plays somebody who tries to, or is intending to assassinate a president. A movie
which Oswald watched. Oswald watched.
Oswald watched it, and Sinatra suppressed it. And The Manchurian Candidate, which was also, which is an assassination movie that Sinatra produced and is one of the great American movies, went unseen for 20 years because Sinatra was like, nobody, I'm not going to let anybody see this. You know, my friend John Kennedy was killed. We're putting this on the shelf because it's too graphic or whatever. Then think about Reagan's assassination, right? Hinckley tries to shoot Reagan to impress Jodie Foster because he saw Jodie Foster in Taxi Driver, which is a movie with a political assassination plot in it. Travis Bickle's idea in the midst of this movie is that he is going to shoot this mayoral candidate in New York City and can't get close enough. And then he turns into a righteous avenging angel and kills the pimp of this 12-year-old girl and becomes a hero. An ironic hero in the city, even though we know that he is a psychopath whose purposes were.
And John, this is part of the link. Travis Bickle is inspired by Arthur Bremer,
right? Who was the assassin of George Wallace,
right? So this is how I was
paralyzed George Wallace, right? So my whole point here, if we sort of iterate this back and back and back, is that social media is creating an atmosphere of permission structures all over the place, and opening Overton windows all over the place. And again, I think that the number of people on Earth who want to go, "You go, girl," to Lindsay Clancy, numbers in the hundreds on a planet of 8 billion. But we can't sort our way through that, and 15 years from now, it may not be 800 people. It may not, when I Don't Like Mondays came out, it was a huge controversy and scandal. Radio stations would not that they played a lot of new wave, but radio stations wouldn't play it. People were outraged. It was gross. It was considered unspeakable. Now no one would consider it unspeakable. Now you'd be like Mark Cherry's mother. It's like, yeah, I mean, I hate Mondays too. Maybe I'll go shoot up a school. And then 20 years later, people are shooting up schools. And then this contagion of school shootings happens. And the transmission point, the vector, all that happened before social media, right? The school shooting surge happens before social media, but accelerates, I think, at least, during the social media period, and can't get a sense of reality here. Because if we live in a world in which it is seen as something on a continuum of human behavior, that you have children and that you murder children, and that the murdering children is the most extreme example of parenting, but it's an example of parenting. That's a terrifying world to live in. And it's a world that, like, civilization came into being literally to prevent from becoming the world that we live in, right? What is it the Greek myths have Kronos doing? Kronos, who is then toppled by his children, the Greek gods, he eats them. He eats them so that they won't challenge him. What are the great early tragedies, of America, of theater and of civilization, right? Is Medea angry at her husband Jason, or her consort Jason, for making a political marriage with somebody else, murders their children. And if you see Medea, which I've seen, I saw it with Diana Rigg 30 years ago on Broadway, the entire play is the chorus every 5 minutes saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Medea, don't do it. Calm down. Medea, don't do it. It's not worth it. Jason's not worth it. Like, take a pill. Settle down. Settle down. Something terrible is about to happen. So the world where civilization arises in order to prevent these evil impulses from becoming normalized dates back to the foundation of our existences as people living in societies. And now we're like going backward into it without even knowing that it's happening. Or maybe we're not. That's what I'm saying. Like, maybe it's 900 people and we just feel like it's 20 million people.
Well, but and even that is the not knowing thing is part of that too, right? In the drama, a key part of the plot is that you couldn't possibly expect, this pretty 90-pound girl to have been a potential mass murderer, and she was, and that's why people question: do I know my friend? Do I know my fiance? Do I know my daughter? Does anybody really know anybody? Becomes the thing. Is it true that literally anybody is capable of this in the right circumstance?
And the truth is, I guess anybody. On the one hand, anybody is capable of anything. We're all flawed, sinful creatures, and we all have base impulses and selfishness, and nihilism can afflict anybody, and nobody is all good or all bad or anything like that. But there are these like pretty iron barriers to guardrails, let's say, that seem to be almost in our genetic programming. I mean, it's in our genetic programming to protect our children, to protect them, like, not to hurt them. And that's throughout the animal. I mean, yeah, some animals like Kronos eat their children, eat their babies, but mostly not, and that is not, we are hardwired to take care of the vulnerable creatures that we create, and the fact that there is this kind of cultural shift to, all right, let's be honest, anybody could do it. Yes, and really, really no, because if the answer is yes, then we're not going to survive. We are going to end up in some dystopian hellscape, antinomian dystopian hellscape, in which it's the war of all against all. So it's another reason to do something pretty extreme before the social media companies take over. I read today that think Anthropic, one of the AI, NVIDIA or some major AI company is predicting that within 15 years, their annual earnings will be $500 trillion, which is 200 times more than all tech companies that now exist put together. We can't let that happen, obviously, because then we really will be, taken over by the bots. What a fun way to go into the last weekend before Labor Day, which I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful time. And if you want to have a wonderful time, very quickly at the movies, I actually have an absolutely hardwired recommendation for you. Go see Coyote versus Acme, which I saw last night. This is a wild, crazy comedy that was made 4 years ago and that was almost destroyed by Warner Brothers, which made it because Warner Brothers thought that it would do better destroying it and taking it as a total tax write-off, then releasing it and it failing. They were talked out of it, and then they sold it to a minor distributor who released it last night, and it's now out. And it's one of the best comedies of the last 10 years. It's uproariously funny, and it's about a law firm that sues the Acme Corporation for producing the tools that cartoon characters use to try to hurt each other. And instead they end up only hurting themselves. Product liability. It's a product liability law firm in Albuquerque, run by Will Forte, and the Coyote, sick of constantly being blown up as he's trying to catch the Roadrunner, comes to him to get justice. And this movie is then the portrait of this lawsuit that this fourth-rate schlep of a lawyer does against the Acme Corporation, whose lawyer is John Cena, and one of the funniest performances I've ever seen, practically. And it's delightful. It is delightful. I don't care if you're 60 or if you're 6. You can take any child to see it. You can take anybody to see it. It's great. And so you can wash away the memory of this horrible podcast conversation by enjoying yourself at Coyote versus Acme. So have a wonderful weekend. For Seth America and Abe America, I'm John America. Keep the candle burning.